Hey, it's Will with Infinite Code Tutorials. Today we're going to look at creating multi-tab forms with validations in React. So how to keep all of your data in the same object but use multi-tab forms, and then how to validate them. We're going to talk about how to create a tab, and then we'll talk about the actual validations and the data structure that we need to use to keep that all together and send it to the backend. All right, let's get started. So this is the demo of the final product. We have fields in all three of these categories. If I hit the next button, I'm not able to advance to the next page. I have a requirement here. For example, if I have a phone number and I try to enter in letters, I'm going to get another validation. I'm going to show you all how to add that validations and how to create these tabs here, just so that you can see how one tab would flow to the next. Once I have all of the required fields and passing in the right way, the correct either integer values or string values, I can go on to the next, and I am creating more validations on this page. So that's what we're going to see in the upcoming demo. Before we get into the mechanics of how tabs work, I want to show you a demo here and look at the setup of the app. So let's imagine that we have a health club that does a health analysis before you actually join the club, and we have information, activity, and diet. Something like this is a really good use case for a multi-tab form, breaking up the information so it doesn't overwhelm the user. Now notice that I have these three tabs. One is already lit up, and then the others are disabled until we actually press the next button. So as you progress in the tab, these buttons here will light up. As you might be able to tell, I am using Next.js, Tailwind, and TypeScript. What I'm going to show you about tabs is going to work for just a general React app. I just happen to be using this file structure. I really like Tailwind. I like to keep the type safety. I'm used to it. So don't be overwhelmed if you don't know how to use Next.js or Tailwind or TypeScript. This will also work in a regular React app. Now we're looking at what the app would look like if we do not have tabs hooked up. So we have those three tabs or buttons at the top, and then we have the information, activity, and diet section, but they're all being displayed as divs here. So what we're going to do is look at how to actually create tabs so that we only see one at a time. The first thing that we're going to do is we'll create a state variable called active tab. And the Copilot wants to use information here. We're going to use a number just to keep things simple. And as far as TypeScript is concerned, we can explicitly declare that that's going to be a number. Next thing that we're going to do is create a function which is going to handle tab change. I'm going to call this toggle tab, tab number, and then that's going to be set active tab and the tab. So the number that we put in there. Now we're going to pass down the tab display, which will actually be a string here. We're going to use the active tab state. So if active tab is equal to 1, give me block, else give me hidden. And this is a CSS modifier here. So we'll import that into information. I'm creating a TypeScript interface here, and my tab display is actually going to be destructured as a parameter here. If you're using Tailwind, you would normally just have the quotations and the other quotations. But since I'm going to use string interpolation, I need to have the brackets and then the backticks. So what I can do here is now interpolate tab display. So when that is passed down, I'm going to either get here block or hidden. What I need to do on my page here is actually enable the handle click. And for the previous button, I'll create a function that says toggle tab, but active tab -1. And as you guessed, we'll do the same thing here, but we'll change that minus to a plus. Now, active tab is set to be 1 just by default. And if I click the next button, you see that information, the information tab, disappears. That's because now active tab is 2. So if we do the same for activity and diet, we'll have all the tabs hooked up. So what I will do here is I will do the same in activity. And I'm going to just change the active tab equals to 2 as our condition. In activity, the same thing here, the interface. Feel free to use a types folder with an index.js for your interfaces. Just for demo purposes, I'm keeping it in the same component. I'll destructure that. Okay, so now we know that active tab is set to 2. If I click next, activity disappears. If I click previous, we have activity, we have diet, and information, right? But I click previous, so active tab is now 1, so we don't see the activity tab. So I go here, I'm going to hook up diet. Now I got to go to my page. That'll be 3. Activity. All right, that's already hooked up. Beautiful. Still getting an error on my page. What is going on here? Tab display in diet. Oh, I went back to activity, not to diet. Beautiful. Now if I click next here, you see nothing because we don't have a tab display for active tab equal to 4. In preparation for validations, we're going to create another state variable called access. And this access variable is going to be similar to the tab variable, so we're going to use it in a different way. By the way, if you're new to TypeScript, the IntelliSense is already interpreting that this is going to be a number. I don't explicitly have to declare it, but just for type safety, we can use the number. So this access variable is going to tell us which of these tabs have passed the validations. So what I need to do here is I need to pass both access and toggle tab down to tab buttons. So access equals access, and then toggle tab is toggle tab. I don't like to change the names of the props because it's just confusing for me. I did it here, so just to, it's not exactly an active tab. I am using the ternary operator to actually pass down a string for a CSS modifier. That's why I changed the name here. This is just a personal preference. In tab buttons, create the interface. I love Copilot. And then we'll destructure those here. Oops. There we go. So for the tab buttons, I'm setting up the possibility to be able to click on one of these buttons and actually go back to that tab, but also to disable the subsequent buttons here if I haven't passed validation in the first tab. And we'll see that a little bit later on when we put the actual inputs in.
So we're going to always leave this first custom button as the disabled as false, because that's the first thing that the user is going to see. We never want to disable that tab. The handle click here, when I click on information, is very similar to what we did, exactly what we did when we had the handle next function. We're going to go ahead and change the handle next function here in a moment. So these handle clicks are going to all be the same, setting the correct number, the correct integer. Nothing really new here. Correct. Now here's the trick. If access is less than 2, you want it to be as disabled. And if access is less than 3, you want this one to be disabled. So now I need to set access here in the next. And we'll do that, but the trick for the actually functioning tab is to use React Hook Form to set our triggers. Let's go ahead and hook up the access here, and then we'll get into actually putting the inputs and creating the triggers. So back on my page, I'm going to create a function called handle next. So in my handle next function, I'm going to use the switch case setup, and it's for case 1. I'm going to set access to 2, but I'm also going to toggle the tab to 2 because they have different functions. There we go. And then case 2, same thing. And however many tabs you need, you can set the various cases, right? That's why I'm showing you the switch case setup. So for handle click now, I can just say handle next. And we should see that these light up when access is set. Beautiful. Okay. So we'll see how that works with the triggers here in a moment. Let's go ahead and use the ternary operator here to switch the next button to a submit button at tab 3. So if active tab is equal to 3, and I like to go ahead and set up my parentheses so that I don't get confused. So if it's equal to 3, I want to change it to a submit button. If it's not equal to 3, I want to use a next button. So now for this custom button for our submit, we'll go ahead and use the Copilot. We're going to keep it at false for the moment. We'll use another function to disable it once it's submitted. And very important here, when you have buttons, you should make sure you either have a button or submit. If you forget to put a button here, sometimes this submit will trigger. Let's keep this at blue, 500. And we'll obviously hook up a form submit here in a little bit, but for right now that alert is fine. So let's see what happens. Yeah, we change it to submit. All right, let's get into how to actually use React Hook Form with inputs and validations. All right, so to start building out the form, we need to add 2 packages. One is going to be React Hook Form. Very simple like that. And the next one is going to be React Bootstrap, but that one's a little trickier. So it's npm install -- save -react, or no dash, space, React Bootstrap. And then the latest version, which is 4.6.0 at the time of this recording. And if you don't have this save flag here, it's not going to work for you. So that is the actual code there, even though React Bootstrap says something differently. And I already have these installed, so if you need to go ahead and install those, do that. And then let's check out what we need here in the page to actually get all of this working. We're going to need to import use form from React Hook Form. And then we're going to actually need to import the Bootstrap CSS. And so the React Bootstrap won't actually work unless you import the Bootstrap CSS here. Okay, so those are the two packages you're going to need to get the rest of this thing working. All right, let's talk about if you're using TypeScript. I have created a interface here for the health analysis data. So what you'll see here is for information. This is going to be for activity, and this will be for diet. Okay, so using those 11 fields here. Now I need to import that interface from the types. And just like in any React form, I'm going to have to set the form data in state. With TypeScript here, I am go ahead and explicitly say that the type of this data is the health analysis data. So we just have blank empty strings for the strings and then 0 for any integer values. I also set up a handle input change. This is going to be very similar to whatever React form that you're using, just using some type safety here. So what is it that we're going to need to do in order to use React Hook Form? Well, the first thing we're going to need to do is destructure the use form that we imported from React Hook Form. And at the moment, we don't need handle submit. So we need the register, we need the form state, we need the trigger. So this use form knows that I'm using health analysis data on my form. Now, you have to do this in the parent component and pass it down to your children component, or else it's not going to work. So you can see here that I have passed it down into information. So I've passed down form data, set form data, handle input change, register, and errors. So before we go any farther, it's crucial that we need to wrap every single component that we're going to use in our multi-tab form in form. It can be a simple HTML form like this, or you can use the React Bootstrap form. But if you don't do that, then we're not going to be able to capture the values that we have in each tab. So here, let's take a look at the information page. What I have is just one field, the name, your name, but I do not have anything set up in order to capture the value. So in the information page, I have expanded my interface to accept form data, set form data, handle input change, errors, and register. So in order to get the types right here, you need to import field values and use form register from React Hook Form. I'm also importing input group and form from React Bootstrap. Now, if you want to use some of the text from React Bootstrap, that's fine. I just found it really easy to create the labels in the H6 and use Tailwind here. Now, I am wrapping my form.control in input group because I am setting this up to be able to have a clear button here later. But for right now, what I want to show is that I can use register and errors as well as the other props that I've passed down in order to actually create triggers on this page and disable the next button, the next click, by actually triggering the requirements, the validation on this form. Inside form.control, I am going to register the name. Copilot is looking pretty good right now, but what I want to do is I want to actually use a ternary operator to say when it's going to be required. So if form data.name is an empty string, then I want to say I want to return the message required, else I want to return nothing. I'm going to make my value as form data.name, and then for my own change function, I have the E, and I'm going to have to specify the type if you're using TypeScript. That is right. But I have the handle input change. So in order to actually show you that my errors are going to come up, I'm going to say errors.name and I want an H6 here. Class name using Tailwind, text red 500, and I want to have a little bit of a margin to the left. And then I'm going to use string interpolation here. Errors dot name, if it's there, dot message. Errors. There we go. So now let's look at the handle next. I have a next click here. You can see that I've created a handle next function. And the handle next, we saw how we had the case, the two cases here. But now I'm using trigger from React Hook form, and the only thing that I'm triggering is name. Then the dot then is valid is the parameter here. If it's valid, then I'm setting access to 2, and I'm toggling the tab to 2. So the moment of truth here, if I hit next, I should expect to see the required message right here to the left of name. All right. Now I need to do the same thing for all of the inputs, but instead of writing out each input, I'm going to create a utils.index.ts file, and then I'll map over an array of objects so that I can have all of the inputs here and be able to account for all of the validations, especially since these validations aren't all that complicated. So to be able to dynamically create all of the input fields, I've created another folder called utils and an index.js file in there. I'm importing my health analysis data from types, and I know that these are the 5 attributes that I want on my info fields or my information page. So you see that I have export const info fields. This is going to be an array. So it's going to be an array of objects. So then I'm going to specify the types for each key that I'll have in this array. So I'll have a name, which is the key of health analysis data. I'll have a label, which is a string. I'll have the asterisk, which is going to say if it's necessary for that to have a validation. So you might have some forms that, or you might have some inputs that would be optional for the user. So we could say true or false if the asterisk is needed. Basically, is it required or is it not required? You could very well say required. The next thing I'll do is a placeholder, and that could be optional. Maybe you don't want to have the placeholder there. It's a string. I'm going to call this pattern, and this is actually going to be an object. So this is the value, which is a regex expression. This is useful on things like telephone numbers. And then the message that you want to be returned if the pattern isn't what you're expecting. And then finally, let's say max length, which is going to be a number. So these are all of the keys that I'm going to put in individual objects. So for example here, I'll have the name, which is name, right? And the label, which will also be name. You'll see where I'm going with this. Asterisk is true, and you saw that I had direct squiggly lines because these are the 3 values that I've specified here that are actually required within this an object. So for here, we don't need the pattern. I do need a placeholder, and I am going to say a max length of 255. That's what we had in the last demo. So let's look at, for example, what if we had the name of phone when we want the phone input? Well, label is phone. We call that phone number. The asterisk is true. Placeholder, your phone number. Now let's look at pattern. So this is already giving me a regex expression of 10 digits. So actually I want something more specific than just the 10 digits. If I'm in the States, for example, I can use the 3 digits, the dash, the 3 digits, and then the 4 digits. So that looks good. Within pattern, I have a message invalid phone number. Let's be a little nicer. Please enter a valid phone number. Yeah. You get a lot farther with honey than you do with vinegar, right? For this max length, it's not even really necessary here for the pattern because it's going to give me the 10 digits here. So we don't even need that max length. So I'm going to do this for all of the rest of the fields here for age, weight, height, and then I will see you in a moment. Before we talk about mapping over the array of objects of inputs, let's talk about the handle clear functionality here. So I want to create an X that will clear out whatever input I have in this field. The first thing I'm going to need to do is that I'm going to have to install npm install React icons. All right, so that'll install. And then I'm going to need to create a handle clear function for clearing out this area. So I'm actually going to use a ternary operator here again. In this case, for data.name. If it's not equal to an empty string, and you can just use the and here rather than using the ternary operator. That's fine. We'll use input group dot text. Just get that set up so we don't see so many errors. And the class name here, I found that you have to give it a height so that it'll be actually the same height as your input. So I stumbled upon 2.3 rims, give it a little bit of padding. The background is white. The border is 0 and the border is white because we don't want that showing up, any of the border stuff. So simply I'm going to create a button in this group. Inside of the button, I'm going to have an X mark. So what we'll do here is we'll import mdclear from React icon /md. And we'll have mdclear here, size of 20. So when I actually type something there, I see the clear. It actually is working without any functionality. So the reason that's happening is because it's a form, and if the button isn't specified as button on the form, then it will actually submit automatically. That's why I said earlier, we got to make sure that this button type is a button. So when I click here now, it doesn't actually clear it. It just was submitting it, and so there was a clearing of the form based on the default behavior. Okay, and so in order to get rid of this little blue mark, which is kind of annoying here, that is coming from the form control. Even though I have border 0, I'm gonna have to go to my global CSS here, and I'm actually gonna have to override the box shadow of form control. So the form control focus is by default on. Here I'm gonna say box shadow none and use the important tag. Let's go back to our information page. One thing that I like to do is create a tab index of -1, meaning that no user can tab into it. So if I type here, I can't tab into the X mark. That way when I tab and I create the next input, I will actually just tab into the next input rather than tabbing into the X. And the last thing that we have to do is on click, you can actually use this set form data here. That is exactly what I'm about to do. I'm going to create a function called handle clear in the top level in the parent component so I can pass that on to every component here. So that looks like on click, and I'll call that handle clear. But what is handle clear? Actually, I'm going to need to call that function, and handle clear will take in name in this case. So let's go back to our page. const handle clear, right? It knows what I'm doing. That is correct. So I'll pass down handle clear here, and you know how that works. Just to show you that handle clear is working and not submitting, I can clear this out. And actually, if we console log form data not name and inspect, let's clear all that out. Here we go. And we don't see anything now. So that's working. So I've created all the info fields. If you're using TypeScript, then you'll use this array, an object of this array. The name is a key of health analysis data. We have a label, an asterisk, a placeholder, a pattern, which is going to be some type of reg expression, and a max length. The pattern, placeholder, and max length are all optional properties. So we saw this a little bit before. We saw the pattern here. And I want to show you how to implement this, how to map over this object and be able to dynamically render all of the inputs. It is a little bit tricky, so that's why I want to show it here on camera. So I've got my map already set up. And this will be field.label. And here, we need to use bracket notation. Beautiful. And the register here, we'll have to interpolate the string. And remember that this is not the name for the information here. This is the name of the actual field of the health analysis data. So it might be more apt to call this here field name. Okay, so for required, we're going to need string interpolation here for two reasons. We want to know if it's actually a required field, which is going to be determined by the Boolean of the asterisk that we use in the utils file when we're mapping over from the fields, the info fields. And if the form data dot field or field name is actually blank. So we'll need string interpolation here once again. And I am within the string interpolation, beautiful, so we don't get confused. So is field dot asterisk true, and is form data, use bracket notations, field dot name equal to an empty string. Let's type the rest of this out. And if so, then we can just simply say required. You can change it to whichever message that you'd like, or return an empty string. So for the max length, it'll be field.maxLength. Or what would be the maximum length for anything, if just in case you didn't fill in the max length. All right, moving on. Let's go ahead and change the placeholder text. We forgot to do that. Field.placeholder. Things are looking a little bit better here. And then let's go on to how we can validate the pattern. So we'll take in a value. Right, so if there's a field.pattern, we're going to return field.pattern.value.test, test the value, or field.pattern.message. However, there's a TypeScript error here for this value. So number is not assignable to string. So we as any, and we're going to need some type of closing bracket here. There we go. So the form data is correct, and the onChange handler is correct. So let's see if this will even allow us to type in the phone number. I'm pressing letters and nothing is happening. So you see that this one is already saying required. But the reason that I can go to the next page if I type in a name is because we haven't set the trigger property in page. So in order for all of these to work, I'm going to actually have to explicitly set the trigger property here based on these attributes. Okay, so I want to make a correction about age and weight since they're both integers. I'm going to create a pattern here. I have my value in message, and I'm just going to use any integer for the time being. And we'll do the same thing with weight. This exact same thing. And of course, we're going to say weight. Now, in my types page, if you're using TypeScript, I'm actually going to say that weight and age can be both a number or a string. I need to be of a number so we have the right value, but it needs to be a string so that I can easily check for if it's required in age and weight when I'm actually dynamically rendering on the information page. So when we have the required field here, it makes it a little bit easier to see if someone has entered in the field. Because if I do something like form data field name equal to 0, 0 is a faulty value in JavaScript. So it's not actually going to pick up if it's not actually going to validate if form data.field name is equal to 0. This is going to create a faulty value here, and within the OR statement, if I have both of these in parentheses, and then it'll create the faulty value with the field.asterisk. So this whole thing will be faulty, and then it won't render the required value or the required string on the side. So just to show you that I can not use the validate here, and I still have the triggers now on name, phone number, age, weight, height. And those are showing up only because I created a different type here. So if I put this back just to number, and I'm getting an error in my state variable. Let's try that again. I will only get required on name, phone number, and height. However, if I Control Z a bunch of times, everything's okay there. And information page, I'm going to take this out. Those are all saying required. But the way that I can make sure that I have an integer is I validate the value here with the field.pattern, and it's going to make sure that I have the regex expression that I put in my utils page. So let's try this out. Oh, the last thing that we're going to have to do here is in handle clear. We're going to have to say exactly field.name. And let's make sure this is working. So beautiful. I shouldn't be able to type any type of letters here. So let's see what happens when I do. Okay, so it is picking up the validation, right? However, it's picking up the max length validation. So what happens if I have just 2 characters? Right, please enter a valid age. So it's picking up the max length first, and then it's validating here. Now, there are ways to make sure that a user cannot enter in anything but a valid phone number or an integer value. and we can actually change the handle input change. We can actually change that, but you would not be able to render those fields dynamically like we're doing here. You wouldn't be able to map over these. So you would map over, for example, all string values, and then you would have to actually create an individual input using input group, form control, etc., and then change handle input change. The other thing that you could do in order to dynamically render it, but be able to change the handle, the onChange function, is you could create a type here and specify which type and say, well, if the type is so-and-so, then render a certain handle input change function in order to make sure that the users can't even enter anything but integers into phone number. That's out of scope for our current topic, so let's see if we can just get this working. Let's enter a valid phone number. Right, it's got to be 3, 3, and 4. And enter a valid age, 18, and a valid weight, and let's say 175. So let's see if all this passes. Beautiful. Okay. So that's what we're going to do for all of the rest of the pages, and I'll see you in a moment. All right, so check it out. I have successfully completed the activity and diet pages, and I created a components prop interface from in my types file, since all of these are going to be the same for all of these components. Just for these demo components, you'll probably have some different props for the various components, whatever you're doing. But these are all the same, and it makes it a little bit more dynamic. If you notice that I go to next easily without any errors, so if you console log the errors here, you see I get no errors. And the reason for that is that I have not actually enabled the trigger here in my handle next case. So that is quite easy. I'm going to do the same thing I did here. I'll hook up the triggers, and I have to call the triggers in each case. So trigger there you go. Come on, Copilot. There we go. Then is valid. It's finite. Not is finite. And then I'll wrap these. That's correct. And I need a... Great. So that's going to handle, and it's going to refresh here. I'll do the same thing I did earlier. We'll fill in all of that. Great. Now I get the required. So I enter something here, enter something here, enter something here. But notice this changes to submit. So how do we address submit here? Well, that's going to be in our form submit function. Let's look at that now. Okay, so check it out. If I try to submit on this diet page, I get my errors. The way that I found to do that is to have these two if statements. So if any of these attributes are empty strings, then trigger daily diet, break. And then this is or, right? So if this is empty or this is empty or that is empty. However, when you're actually going to submit, you need the and statements. If form.data exercise duration is not equal to an empty string and, right, so any one of these values being falsy will render all of this falsy and you won't actually submit. Now, one thing that I found actually from a form in production and users having being able to enter blank spaces here. So if I enter blank spaces here, I will actually get a submit. So one way to handle that is actually in our handle input change. So I have the handle input change here where I'm setting the form data. And I can add this if statement. So if, let's destructure the value from e.target. There we go. So if value.trim is not, try that again, equal to an empty string, then we will set the form data there. I need the parentheses on the trim. All right, so you can see that once I refreshed the page and it was actually able to load the handle input change again, I'm not able to delete that last character, so it doesn't recognize the trim there. So that's why if I say value.length equal to 0, then I am able to set the form data to an empty string. So let's see if that works there. So I'm able to delete all the way. My errors are working. Let's enter some information here. And what happens, I can't even enter a space here because it's already trimming. So if I'm 175, I wish I were 175. All right, boom, boom. Here are our errors. If I have a gallon a day, sometimes I'm vegetarian. Spinach smoothies are my jam. Okay, now we're just going to see the console log in the sidebar. There we go, form submitted. So you can add your own logic into the form submit. So we have seen how to create multi-tab forms with validations using React and React Hook Forms. I'm Will with Infinite Code Tutorials. Have a great day. Peace.